All right, what I need you to do is get out your sketchbook and get a page in your sketchbook to take these notes on. When you have completed the notes, take a picture of it and submit it on Canvas so that I can grade it and give you your points for it. But keep your notes in your sketchbook for me, please. All right, we're going to be talking about value and shading and some different shading techniques. So, the first thing we need to do is we need to get the definition for value. So, value is an element of art that refers to the lightness or darkness. So, value is an element of art that refers to the lightness or darkness. So, right underneath that, we're going to draw 3 boxes going across. So, we've got 1, 2, and 3. And they don't have to be perfect. Mine are kind of wonky. It's okay. The first one is going to be a light. The middle one is going to be a medium. And then the last one is going to be a dark. So if we take our pencils, especially our wooden pencils, are best to shade with. I don't recommend shading with a mechanical pencil because it's too fine of a line on the end. But if you have your wooden pencil, see how wide that end of that graphite is? You can hold it down by the end and let your pencil just rest on the paper and just rock it back and forth like this. And you're able to get a very, very light shading because you're not putting very much pressure, and because you're holding it so far away from the tip, it's really hard to put pressure on it. So you're going to get that very, very light shading. When you want more of a medium, if you move your fingers halfway down the pencil about here, and then you just do the same thing, you just let the pencil rest on the paper, and then you just rock the pencil back and forth, then you're going to get a medium value in that box. And it's because you're naturally putting more pressure on it because of how you hold the pencil. Remember, pencils are tools just like anything else in art, and it matters how you use the tool. If you use it correctly, it makes it easier for what you're doing. If you use it incorrectly, then you're not going to get the results that you need. So that's why when you want it light, you hold it down on the end by the eraser, medium in the middle, and then dark, you want to really hold it down towards the end, and that pencil's going more upright. And then you're just going to do the same exact thing. You're going to rock that pencil back and forth, and you're able to get a little bit more of a dark value, like so. Okay, so how you hold your pencil matters. So write that on there. We're going to put how you hold your pencil matters. Okay, so make sure you remember that. Make sure you remember that tip because it'll help you. All right, we're going to look at some different ways to shade. So we're going to look at some different ways to shade. These are some different techniques that we're going to look at. So the first one, number 1, is going to be line shading. Now, line shading is where you have lines that go in one direction. So that would be lines going diagonally, lines going horizontally, or lines going vertically, but they're just lines going in one direction. That's how I shaded up here in these boxes, was using line shading. Remember I said just rock it back and forth? That's going in one direction. All right, the pros, we're going to talk about pros and cons to each one of these. So the pros is that it's fast. This is probably the number one way I shade in my sketchbook, or to do a really quick drawing, because it's so fast and it's so easy. So it's really fast and it's really easy. The cons or the problems that you might run into is that when you do transitions, so transitions are where you go from your light box to your medium box, this area in between, that's transitioning from one to the next. So when you're doing transitions and you have super, super light, and then you have medium, and then you have super dark, you can see where one ends and where the next one begins. There's a very distinct line there. And so you don't get smooth transitions. The transitions are hard lines. And when you're trying to do realism, those hard lines don't really exist there. It's very rare that you've got a really harsh line when you're doing photorealism. All right. Another thing is if you have a shape like a circle that's rounded, and even the squares up there, and I shade that circle, how hard is it to stay inside that circle, right? You're either stopping a little short and having a little white space, or you're going outside the circle and ruining the shape. And so it's hard to maintain shapes. It's hard to keep it in the area that you want to keep it in. So there's going to be pros and cons to each one of these. Each one has its own use in the drawing world and the shading world and the art world. And I just want you to know what the pros and cons are of each one. All right, so we're going to go to number 2. And if you have room on your paper you're working on, please just keep working on that same sheet. I'm just trying to write big so y'all can see what I'm doing. All right, number 2 is y'all's favorite one. Oh my goodness, y'all love this one so much, and I hate it. Oh, it's horrible. Please don't do this one. Please don't. All right, so smudgy finger is where you take some graphite. You take some of your graphite from your pencil and you put some graphite down, right? Like you put some darkness, some shading, and then you take your little finger and you smudge it around and try to make it go from one side to the other. Or you take a tissue or whatever somebody's taught y'all to do, or you just think works. And then that's your shading, right? That's what you do for shading. So there are some pros to this. Let's talk about the pros first. The pros are it would make really good fog or steam or something blurry. So if you're trying to achieve something like this in your drawing, this would be a really super cool way to do it, and it would work really, really good. The cons is that it's messy. Like my fingers got graphite on it, and now every time I touch somewhere else, I'm going to get marks on my paper, right? So it's messy. Did I stay inside my circle? No, I've got all this smudginess outside my circle, so it's hard to keep shapes. It gets all over the place, right? It gets inside and outside. And then if we look at the values, I've got dark, and I've got a medium, and I've got a light. And so you lose all your transition values. So you lose all those in between. Like there's a bunch of values between dark and medium. And we're going to look at that a little later, that there's really like, 3 or 4 values that are in between these. And then there's 2 or 3 values in between these. So you don't want to lose those. That's what gives you that transition from one to another. So that's my problem with that one. All right, number 3 is dots. Also known as pointillism or stippling is what we call it in drawing. So we're going to write out stippling. And if you were painting, it would be pointillism, where you're using dots to create imagery. All right, so literally it's dots. And the more dots that you put together, the darker it looks. And the less dots that you put together, the lighter it looks. And so you're literally just making dot after dot after dot after dot after dot. And these dots give you that value. Now, this is a really super cool shading technique, and you can get some amazing transitions in it. And when you do it right, it looks really, really cool. It's a really, really awesome drawing technique. So the pros are that it has good transitions. It's interesting to look at, right? It's got like a texture to it almost. And so the eye likes looking at this kind of stuff. It's stylized. So if you're doing a face and you do it in this dot shading style, then you're going to get a more stylized look to your face than a photorealistic look. And that's what you want sometimes. And so that can be a pro to this shading style. The cons are that it's so time consuming. It takes forever to do this shading style. But we know that good art takes time sometimes. And so that's why we talk about it, and it's a valid shading style because it's very useful. All right, number 4 is cross hatching. Cross hatching is literally where you overlap lines on top of each other. All right, so that would be like if I'd started with a diagonal line and then I went back on top of it with a horizontal line. But the first time I stopped here, right? So then with my horizontal line, I'm going to try to stop here. So each time you stop a little bit shorter than you did the time before. Then I might go with a diagonal line going across another direction. So the first time I went this way. So this time I might turn and go this way. It's kind of like a plaid pattern almost is what you're creating. Then the next time I'm going to stop here. I'm going to go with a vertical this time. So maybe this way. And then I might go back to my original diagonal. And then I might go with a horizontal again. And then I might go diagonal the other direction. So I'm just using different lines going in different directions. And I'm just stopping a little shorter each time. So what happens is you get this really, really super dark, but then you have all these like transitions in between them. And if you really take your time, you can get them where you don't see a hard line, like we are seeing a couple of those in there. You can really smooth those out and get them to fade into one another. But you get a lot more values than what we've looked at from some of the other ones. So with cross hatching, the pros are that it's fast. It's just like line shading, right? Except for you're overlapping them on top of each other. You get a great texture. Just like with the dots, you get a more stylized look to your drawing, which can be really, really cool and interesting to look at. The cons that we're going to say is that it's not smooth. So if you're trying to achieve like skin, like what you would see on somebody's face in a realistic way, like a photorealistic way, this isn't going to get that for you. It's not going to ever be super, super smooth because you're going to see all this line work. Then it can be messy. It can be. So the outside edge, you see how it has all these lines sticking out of it like that? It makes it to where it gets really, really messy sometimes if you're not watching what you're doing. So those are the pros and the cons. We're going to talk about one more. This last one that we're going to talk about is my favorite because it is what gets you that photorealism. If you remember the drawing of the girl, the little kid that I showed you on the slideshow, this is the style shading I used for her face because it gets you that super, super smooth. And it is Scribble shading. And it's my fave. Literally, scribble shading is scribbling. That's all you're doing. And everybody can scribble, right? It's kind of like cross hatching, but instead of doing the same line over and over again, you're doing different lines. So it's kind of like a mix between X's and triangles and star shapes. And you just kind of keep doing that over and over and over again on top of each other until you get the effect you're wanting. Now, it's best to start out with your fingers way down on the end. You never want to start scribble shading with your fingers down on the tip of the pencil because it's going to be too dark, too fast. You always want to start with your fingers down by the eraser so that you get that smoothness to it. If you don't, then you're going to end up seeing all those scribble lines that you're using at the end, and that's not what we want. So an example of this, let's draw a box like this, and we're going to do dark on one side, and we're going to go to light on the other side. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold our pencil way down by the eraser, and we're going to find the widest side of our graphite, and we're going to start super, super light on the dark side of the box. And we're just going to scribble really, really super lightly. This is as light as you can possibly make this. You want to barely be able to see it on the page. So we're going to go all the way down until we're almost to where it says light. We leave a little bit of white down there because that's our highlight, and our highlight always stays white. Then we're going to go back and we're going to do it again. And I haven't moved my hand. My fingers are still on the end of the pencil by the eraser. I haven't moved it at all. And that way we're starting to smooth out that line work. You're starting to smooth out all that scribbling by layering another layer on top of it. I like to turn my paper sometimes, and that helps me get those edges a little better. I move my paper so much when I'm shading because it helps you to kind of get those different angles to get that pencil moving in a different direction. It makes it more random than if you keep keeping it the same over and over again. All right, so now I've done twice. The first time I ended here. The second time I ended here. So now the next time I'm going to go back and I'm going to stop a little shorter. So each time you're stopping a little bit shorter, just like the cross hatching that we did, where each time we just stopped a little bit shorter than the time before. You want to try your best to refrain from doing line work. You don't want to keep going in the same direction over and over again. If you catch yourself going in the same direction again, try to go back over it going in an opposite direction. Because if you make a pattern, you're going to see a pattern, and we don't want to see a pattern. We want the eye to push all these lines together and just have them become one mass of a value, of a color, of a shade. And because I'm not ending with a harsh line, you're not going to see those harsh transitions. Like, it's not going to make like where you can see where one ends and the next one begins. It's just going to slowly change into the next one, and the eye's not even going to notice it really unless you really look. And that's what you want. You want the eye to be fooled. Remember, it's your job to fool the viewer into thinking something's going on this paper that's not really going on. You know, this face that we're going to draw is not a real face, but you want the viewer to look at it and think it's real, that it's a photograph of that person. And you do that with shading techniques. Faces that look real is not about the drawing of the face. Proportions are good and they make it look real. Yes, you have to know the proportions, but the shading is what brings it to life and makes it look like a real person. All right, so like I've only gone to here, right? So now I've got to do that again and again and again and again until this is super dark. About when you get to the middle, about here, you're going to move your fingers about halfway down the pencil and you're going to start shading with it in the middle of the pencil, and that's going to make it where you can get much, much darker values than what you get in the beginning. And that's what you want. You want super light on this side and then super dark on this side, right? So we're going to keep shading that over and over and over again, overlapping, layering. I cannot express to y'all how important layers are to artwork to make it interesting and have it have depth to it and make it look three-dimensional and real. So this time I stopped about here. The next time I would stop here. Each time I'm just stopping a little bit shorter than the time before. And I'm going to turn my paper because I'm kind of starting to see some line work going on. And I don't want to see that, right? I want to see that disappear. So you've got to be kind of proactive about seeing mistakes you're making and auto-correcting them. Because that's just part of art. It's kind of like a process of like, ooh, that's not right. Let me change it and do this. Ooh, that's not right. Let's do it a different way. So about when you get about here, you can start moving your fingers really down on the pencil, and that's going to allow you to get a little bit more pressure and get those last few super, super dark values in on the shading. All right, so I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 or 8 because I didn't put arrows on some of them. I've done 7 or 8 layers, and each time I'm getting just a little bit lighter. And if you notice, you can't tell where one stops and the next one begins. It's super, super smooth. So the pros to this is that it is smooth. It takes a little bit to master this. It may not look exactly like mine on the first time you try it. You may have to practice a little bit, but the more you practice this and the better you get at it, the smoother it's going to look. It is very neat and clean. I can stay inside that box really super easily because I can just turn my paper and get right up against that edge and then turn it again and get out in the middle and then turn it again. Whereas those other shading techniques, you're kind of limited more and you can't keep those shapes as well. So it's easy to keep the shape. I can keep my rectangle really super easy. And the transitions are smooth, which is super, super important. The cons, and the only one I can think of, is time. It's like the dot, right? It takes a long time. You've got to layer all those values in order to get that smoothness. And so it's going to take some time for you to do it. And that's a con to a lot of people. But to me, as an artist, I'm willing to give the time in order to get the results that I want. And so that's what I'm wanting y'all to do, is be able to put in that time and effort in order for you to get the results that you're looking for. All right, one more thing we got to talk about. We're going to talk about shading objects real quick. So we're going to look at shading objects. All right, when you need to shade an object, you must first find the light source. Right? The light source, it could be the sun. It could be a lamp. It could be a flashlight. It could be the lights in the ceiling. Sometimes you may have one. Sometimes you may have more than one, right? So sometimes you may have more than one. You may have multiple light sources. So let's look at some simple objects. Let's do this a little flashlight. So let's do a little flashlight like this. And your flashlight doesn't have to be perfect. It's not a big deal. We're just trying to get a light source. You could do a sunshine there if you'd rather do a sunshine. And our light's coming down like this, and it kind of frays out, even like your sunshine would fray out like that. So let's look at three objects. Let's look at a cube. Let's look at a cone. And let's look at a sphere or a circle. So we've got three objects. In our cube, the light is hitting this top part the most. And so this is going to be the lightest part. It's going to be the part that stays white. And then the second part that it's hitting the most is the side. And then this front side is not getting hardly any light. So this side is going to be the darkest. I'm using a mechanical pencil and I really don't like to. I would much rather you use a wooden pencil. There's wooden pencils on the tables. If you need to borrow one, please borrow one. I'm going to give y'all some shading pencils a little later, but I want you to try to master using that regular pencil first before you start using any shading pencils, because it helps you control your pencil to be able to use it as a tool better. So this side would be our medium. And then this top side would remain white, or it would be super, super light, depending on how far away it was from the light source. On our cone, the light's hitting the top, and so the farthest away from it is going to be the bottom. So we're going to do the darkest on the bottom and the lightest at the top. I'm using scribble shading on this one because this is a really weird shape and it's really easy to keep the shape, and I wanted to make sure I kept my shape really well. And so that's why I'm using scribble shading. All right, the circle. The light is hitting right here the most, so that's going to be our light spot. And then over here on the opposite side is going to be where our darkest spot is. So this side is going to be our darkest. And then we're going to shade all the way over, and we're going to leave a white spot over here where the light's hitting. That's called our highlight. I'm doing scribble shading again because it's really easy to keep that shape because it's a circle. And I kind of need to practice that scribble shading, right? It's not super easy. And so the more I do it, the better I'm going to get at it. So the more you can practice that, like go home and practice it if you have some extra time. Try to practice it in your sketchbook maybe during sketchbook time. It really does help the more you practice. It's just like a sport. The more you practice that sport, the better you get at it. All right. All right, so that's all we're going to talk about shading objects. Later, we're going to do a still life with charcoal, and we'll talk more about objects and we'll practice objects before we get to that still life. But for right now, I think that's all we're going to look at because we're going to apply the shading to faces. So if y'all will take a picture of this, please, of all your notes you took and submit it on Canvas so I can give you your grade for this. You are not going to turn in your notes. You're going to keep these in your sketchbook.